Hallo allemaal, welkom bij weer een nieuwe video van Zebra Inspiratie. Leuk dat je kijkt. Een andere setting dan wat je van me gewend bent. Want ik spreek vandaag met iemand aan de andere kant van de wereld. Want daar is echt heel veel aan de hand. En hij zit al naast me, Topher Field. En Topher woont in Australië, in Melbourne. En ik wil jullie gewoon heel graag laten weten van iemand die daar gewoon woont, wat er aan de hand is. Want we zien heel veel op de mainstream media. Maar ja, eigenlijk heb je weinig tot geen idee wat er nou echt gebeurt. Hallo Topher.
Hello Erica, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here and nice to meet you. We see a lot of news, on the mainstream media about Australia. And wow, it's just unbelievable what is happening on the other side of the world. I've been in Australia in 2001. And it's
nice.
Actually my favorite country of the world. I have a friend there. I've been there. And when I was there, it was for me a country, it's modern. You can travel everywhere. The people are amazing, so relaxed. And when I look at the videos, what's going on right now, it's hard to believe that your country has changed into, a police state, I could say.
Yes.
So Topher, what is going on in Australia?
Well, you kind of touched on it accidentally there. We're too relaxed. We're too relaxed for our own good. There's an expression in Australia that I'm sure you heard many times. She'll be right. Okay. Someone will say, there's a problem. There's, my sink was overflowing. There's water all over the floor. Oh, she'll be right. Grab a towel.
No worries.
Right? She'll
mate.
be right.
Yeah. No worries,
she'll be right, mate. And that really is one of the defining expressions of our culture. There's this very relaxed, everything will work out in the end. It's not that big of a deal. And that's partly been a part of the Australian psyche since the English colonization of Australia. But it's also been kind of validated in the last 40 years. I'm 39 years old. I was born in Australia in 1982. I moved to the city of Melbourne, where I still live, in 1984. I've moved around Melbourne a lot, but I've been in Melbourne all my life. I've traveled, I've seen other parts of the world. And I've loved other parts of the world, but I used to come back home and I had this expression, the more I travel, the more I like Melbourne. And that's no offense to other parts of the world, but it really is quite a uniquely special place. But the problem is we've been so successful at having it so good and so easy for so long that far too many Australians think that this is normal. They think that it's automatic. They think that this is just how things are. And you can go back to the Second World War. Well, the Second World War didn't really touch Australia. The Korean War, we sent some soldiers overseas, didn't touch Australia. The Vietnam War, the same deal. The Iraq War happened on TV screens. Global financial crisis didn't really touch us. We got carried by the resources boom in China. The Asian financial crisis didn't touch us. The dot-com bubble didn't really touch us. We've had decade upon decade. Pretty much my entire lifetime has been charmed. I've lived an incredibly lucky life. And the problem with that is, that's a good thing. I'm very grateful for that, right? But the problem is there are some people who don't recognize that for being special. They don't recognize how unique and how rare and how special and what a gift that is, and how much we should be grateful for that, and how much we should be willing to work to pass that same luck onto our children, so to speak, right? And they just think that's how things are. And they're clueless. They have no concept of what real life can be like. And so when someone like Daniel Andrews, who's our premier in Victoria and has been responsible for a lot of the violence that you've seen over there, responsible for rolling out the anti-terror squad and shooting protesters on sight with rubber bullets. Just scenes that were unthinkable, even in Melbourne, Australia, were unthinkable 18 months ago. And now they're playing out right before our eyes. And yet there are still a huge percentage of people who are sitting there going, oh, no, look, it's not that bad. It's just everyone just needs to do the right thing and go along with what they're told, and then it'll all be fine. There's this real she'll be right attitude. And that's led to this blind obedience, this willful ignorance, if I can put it that way. They want to ignore what's happening right in front of their eyes. And because they have no historical perspective and no global perspective of what life can really be like, they think that in the end, everything's just going to work out fine.
You said a lot of things are going on. What are your measures at the moment? Because you are in a lockdown and that
Mhm.
takes a long time. So what are the measures
So
at the moment?
we are now the most locked down city in the world. In terms of the number of days that we have spent in lockdown, it's the most of anywhere in the world. Um, we right now have a curfew. You're not allowed to be outside of your house after 9 p.m. You are not allowed to leave your house unless it's for one of 5 approved reasons. Uh, all retail is closed. If you leave your house, only one person is allowed to go shopping, for example. You're allowed to leave your house for 2 hours of exercise a day. It's like you're in prison, and they'll let you out into the prison yard for 2 hours a day. A huge number of businesses are closed. Construction has only just reopened after being shut down for a couple of weeks. Most manufacturing is closed. Basically, the whole country has been shut down apart from services that have been deemed to be essential. So food supply, medical, car maintenance, these sorts of things have been deemed to be essential. And if you're not lucky enough to be deemed essential, you're not allowed to leave your house. Except for 2 hours of exercise and to go shopping maybe one time a day. And you have to wear a mask everywhere you go. You can be fined just for not wearing a mask. Oh, I nearly forgot. You're not allowed to go more than 10 kilometers away from your home. And that was 5 kilometers until quite recently. They let us out of a little yard into a bigger yard. How nice of them. Isn't that great? These are things that are completely antithetical to who Australians are. This is not who we are. This is not our way of life. This is not our relationship with our government. This has never been acceptable in Australia before. But I think the tragedy of what's happening, people have this perception of Australians as being these tough, independent, that stand up for themselves and that stand up for each other kind of image. And maybe that was true once upon a time. But I don't think that's been true for about 40 or 50 years.
Okay.
But the perception has continued because nothing has ever really happened to challenge that perception. That perception has just been perpetuated. And we like it because we like to think of ourselves that way. That's a very flattering way to think about yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this has suddenly shown to the world and at the same time has shown to us that actually in reality, we're a bunch of softies. We are easily frightened. We are very obedient, and we are frankly unworthy of the freedom and the prosperity that was given to us by our ancestors because we're not willing to do anything to preserve it and pass it on to our children.
So this kind of measures and these measures that are happening now with the police is what you say is like that it it suddenly hit you. You had no idea, because I thought it was really quickly. It happened really quickly. That is measures and the police, because what we see, on the mainstream media is that we see a lot of violence and the police fighting against people.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen a video from of a parent who was divided with their child, and the child was vaccinated, and the parent was screaming. I've seen demonstrations that people got fighting. So is this happening for real, or is this not real?
It's absolutely happening for real. But the thing you need to keep in mind, even when there's a protest, I've been at a lot of these protests, including the ones that have turned nasty. And there's just a fundamental reality that you can have a protest with 10,000 people on this city block, but someone 2 city blocks away doesn't even necessarily know that you're there. Right? So it's extremely localized. It's not as though the whole country is like this. These are the flashpoints. These are the moments of conflict that, of course, the news media have all their cameras turned to and so forth. And one of the big messages that I want people to understand, and I've proven this time and again because I've been live streaming from the protests, and then I'll do a debrief and I'll go back through the footage live on Facebook and talk about it with my audience and say, look, this is what happened, then that happened, and then this decision was made, and so on. There can be no doubt, no honest person looking at the evidence would come to the conclusion that the protesters were causing the violence. And I'll give you an example from Saturday, I believe it was Saturday, the 18th of September, if I'm remembering the date correctly, where I was at the protest. I live streamed the entire thing. We chose to walk away from the police time and time again. So we congregated at a meeting point. The police were very close nearby and gathering more buses of police coming in, riot police coming in, bringing in vehicles, bringing in weapons, all that sort of stuff. And we got together, a few thousand of us, and we began to march away from the police. Why? Because we weren't there for violence. We weren't there for confrontation. We're not stupid. We don't have weapons. We don't have guns. We don't have body armor. We don't have tear gas and pepper spray. We're not going to march into the police. So we marched away from them. And then the police continuously were trying to get in front of us to create a confrontation. And we kept on turning corners and turning away from them. They successfully trapped us on one occasion, and then everyone was able to escape through an apartment block where someone opened up some very large doors and everyone slipped away. And then we kept on marching away from the police, and they finally trapped us a second time. And this is one of the images that I believe did go around the world. So you tell me whether you saw this, an image of a 70-year-old woman who got pushed by a police officer and thrown onto her back and then pepper sprayed in her eyes. She was wearing a red jacket, and she had two police officers standing over her spraying OC spray, whatever, I don't know what it gets called over there, but we call it pepper spray, into her eyes. And so I was there. I was at the other end of the group when that particular assault took place, where the police assaulted that woman. And so what happened was they finally had us trapped a second time on this particular protest. We'd been marching around for about an hour and a half, continuously avoiding confrontation, and they managed to trap us a second time. And after that second time, everyone was sick of it. And so instead of slipping away, and we couldn't slip away, where they had us was perfect for them. We were in a box canyon. You couldn't climb the walls. There was no other escape. We had police cordons at both ends. And people just went, you know what, I've had enough. And they just pushed their way through the police line at one of the ends. Okay. And I was part of that push that went through. And you can see that in my footage from the day. And so what happened, of course, was the media, they managed to catch that push from the helicopter, and they had some cameras from high up at the top of the box canyon looking down. And all they showed on the media that night was these protesters violently attacking these police officers who were standing across the road. They didn't give any of the context of what had happened for an hour and a half before that, or the fact that at the other end of the protesters, we were also trapped. They made it look like we walked up to a police line and pushed our way through. Nothing could be further from the truth. And this is this inversion that happens where these people, media, politicians, police chiefs, etc., they stand up in front of the cameras and they lie to your face. They lie to the camera, and they know they'll get away with it because no one in the mainstream media is calling them out. However, there's people like myself who are live streaming, and there's another chap called Real Rukshan. His name is Rukshan. He's of Indian heritage, but he's Australian born, and he's become an absolute national hero through all of this because he gets in there and he streams from the very front line. I don't go to the front line. Like I'm not afraid of a fight, but I ain't looking for one. I keep my distance from where the police are, right? Rukshan has a press pass and a lot of courage, and he will get in there and he will really get the footage right from the very, very point of contact between the police and the protesters. And when you look at his footage, when you look at my footage, when you look at some of the other reporters and people that aren't part of the mainstream media, they're part of the independent media, that's when you see the truth. And the truth most of the time is literally the opposite of whatever the nightly news told you.
Yeah. Well, we recognize that here as well. I heard that now they... well, in the beginning, I read that your vaccination rate was really low. It was about 80%. And now it's higher because of all the measures that the propaganda that the government is taking.
And the bullying. That's the word for it. It's bullying.
It's bullying.
People have been bullied into taking the vaccination.
Yeah. Yep. And now it's mandatory for some groups like teachers last week. And this week we heard that the police is for the program. How is this working? What is the reaction of the people that get the mandatory for, like teachers or policemen?
Yeah, I have a lot of these people reaching out to me through my page, and many of them recognize there's nothing I can do, but they just need someone to talk to, and there's not a lot of people for them to talk to, so they talk to me. A lot of people in despair, and there's this lie that gets told that the people who don't want the vaccine, it's because they're conspiracy theorists, or it's because they don't understand science, or what have you. I've got people reaching out to me saying, they have been exempt from every other vaccine for their whole life because when they got their first vaccine as a baby, they had a massive anaphylactic reaction, right? And so they are a high-risk individual. Only their exemption for all the other vaccines is not being recognized for this one. They're being forced to take it or lose their job, and they're afraid. They're sitting there saying, what's going to happen to me if I do this? But then what's going to happen to my family if I don't do this? I lose my job and I can't pay the bills.
Because they're losing their job, huh? If they're not getting
their job is on the line if they don't take it. Now, I don't think that that's actually the truth of what the law says, and something interesting happened today that reinforces my belief that these mandates are not actually enforceable at law. but there's a huge amount of bluff going on. And this might be an interesting theme. If you don't mind me just going into this theme of bluffing for a moment, because we've seen it across a number of different areas in Melbourne.
Okay.
The first example I'll give you is we had the chief health officer, is given all these powers under the emergency declaration. And it's supposedly his health advice that is resulting in these rules, the curfew, the 5 kilometer limit, shutting down the stores, working from home, not allowed to leave your house. It's all supposedly coming from the health advice, right? That's what we're told is happening. That's obviously ridiculous, but that's what we're told. And so then if you disobey, you get given a fine. And these fines can run $5,000 for one incident. Now, I don't know what the exchange rate is like, but 5,000 Aussie dollars is somewhere around about $3,500 or 4,000 US dollars.
Yeah,
all right, is what your fine can be.
About a half.
Yeah. So that's what for one incident, that's what your fine can be. If you have a friend over when you're not supposed to, or if you're more than 10 kilometers away from your home. If you visit a family member, who's struggling mentally and needs a bit of emotional support, well, sorry, no, you're not an approved person to be in this area, so bad luck. But what's been really interesting is that so I've received a few of those fines myself because I attend protests and they're not usually within 5 or 10 kilometers of my house. So they see me on camera because I'm streaming and I'm known. They know who I am. They know where I live. They've showed up to my house multiple times. The police just knocking on my door. And I don't know whether they're there to arrest me or to talk to me, to give me a fine. I don't know. So they've given me a couple of fines and I've always said, I'm not paying this. I'm taking it to court. All right, I'm going to argue this in court because that's my right. As an Australian, that's how our system works. I have the right to take it to court. Thus far, they've always withdrawn the fine. They've never allowed it to go to court. And in fact, that's not just me, that's everybody. I am not aware, now it may have happened, but I am not aware of a single fine that has actually gone all the way to court.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So what does that mean? It means it's a bluff.
Yeah.
It means that they know if it ends up in court, they lose, and that sets a precedent that they don't want to set. So they're not going to let it go to court. It's a bluff.
Yeah.
Now that is playing out in a bunch of different ways. A very courageous guy called Marty Fokker is his name. And he has been videoing a lot of the protests and things and trying to do independent journalism and coverage. He got arrested at one point and he very cleverly left his camera recording when he put it into his backpack. So he couldn't see anything, but he could hear. And what he caught was a senior police officer teaching a junior police officer how they do things. And I kid you not, he caught the senior police officer on camera instructing the junior police officer saying, we trump up some charges so that we can arrest them and put bail conditions on them. We know that it won't stand up in court. It's all bullshit, but we do it for the bail conditions. And this is what he caught a police officer saying to a junior police officer, educating them on how it works. Another bluff. They are literally manipulating and misusing the justice system for the purpose of imposing bail conditions on people. Now, that is a complete perversion of justice. Yeah. A third example of the bluff may well be these vaccine mandates. Now, I didn't know this until literally the last 2 days. So take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt because I'm not certain yet. But let me tell you what I have seen for sure and then discuss what I think it means. So here's what I've seen for sure. You mentioned earlier the mandatory vaccine regime being rolled out for more and more people, teachers, construction workers, police officers. What happened was there was an announcement from the Premier saying that everyone in the what do they call it? There was a list of all of the professions, the essential workers list, all the people that were allowed to work, right? Everyone on that list was required to be vaccinated. And he only gave a very short timeline for that to happen. Now that amounted to hundreds of thousands of people, many of whom didn't want the vaccine. So that created a massive uproar and sent a whole bunch of people off to get vaccinated because they were people who didn't want it. They hadn't chosen to have it up to that point in time, but they believed the lie. And they went, well, now I have to have it. So I better just go and do it because I've got a family to feed. Okay. I can understand why they would make that decision. Yeah. What happened within 24 hours was the list of essential workers was completely revised and a whole bunch of people were removed. They didn't change who was allowed to work, interestingly enough. They didn't come out and say, oh, you've been removed from the essential worker list. You're not allowed to work anymore. None of that was done. It was just this paperwork change, where all of a sudden, a lot of these professions that had been on that list and were now thinking, I have to get vaccinated, otherwise I'll get fired, they're not on the list anymore.
Hmm.
And we haven't had an explanation for why the change. And why have they changed who's on the essential workers list, but they're not enforcing the essential workers list? They're not making those people stay at home all of a sudden. They've changed the list, but they're not actually, like, what, we haven't had that explained. The second thing that happened just today, we have a couple of excellent MPs, members of parliament here in Victoria. And one of them is his name is David Limbrick, and he's for a party called the Liberal Democrats, not to be confused with our Liberal Party, which is useless. These are the Liberal Democrats. It's literally a whole different organization, despite the similarity in the name.
Hmm.
And he's been excellent throughout this whole journey. He was asking questions of, I believe it was the employment minister, but don't quote me on that, but one of the members of parliament, a minister of the current Victorian parliament. And he was asking questions around what employers should do if their employee was either unvaccinated or did not want to become vaccinated, but they were subject to these mandates. Okay. Now, according to the mandates, it's very clear. The employer cannot allow that employee to work, can't roster them on, can't let them onto a job site until that person complies and gets vaccinated. It's very clear. But the minister's answer was anything but clear. Very, very muddy. She tried to go on the attack and get really snide and really rude at David Limbrick, which didn't work. And then she realized she was going to have to answer the question. And so she talked around in circles for a while. And in the end, all she said was, the employer should really have a chat with the employee about the importance of being vaccinated and about the science and about how it's the right thing to do. And that was it. That was her answer on the floor of Parliament to a direct question about what an employer should do if one of their employees wouldn't comply with the mandate. Now, to me, knowing that they've bluffed on their arrests and they bluffed on the chief health officer's orders and the charges and the fines, I think they've bluffed again. And I think David Limbrick just called them out and they got caught bluffing. Yeah. So I don't think there's much substance at law in any of these orders that are being given, but it's a fear campaign. And that, I think, also explains why the police have become so violent, because fear is the central pillar of the government's power right now. They don't actually have the legal authority to do what they're doing, but if they can make everyone afraid, then they comply anyway.
Yeah. But last week, I saw a couple of reporters sending out an SOS to the world,
Yes.
to America. Don't send troops, don't send soldiers, but put out political pressure. And why? Why was there an SOS? Why? What is the meaning of that? What do you need from the world?
We honestly, if the scenes that have come out of Melbourne had come out of Vietnam, China, Colombia, Poland, they would be receiving condemnation from all over the world. The United Nations would be passing resolutions. The EU would be speaking up. The United States would be speaking up. We would see all of this condemnation of human rights abuses. But I think because no one expected it to happen in Australia, it's caught everyone so off guard that people almost don't quite believe it, and they don't know how to react. And what we need more than anything right now from the international community is condemnation. We need the international community to be calling us out and saying, hey, this is not okay. And even to the point, and I know that some Republican senators in the US have actually been making some noises about this, trying to put sanctions on Australia and actually saying, no, we the international community will not sit by while you violate the human rights of your own citizens. And if anyone else did this, we would impose economic sanctions. So just because it's you doesn't give you a free pass. We're still going to impose economic sanctions on you. Honestly, that is what's needed right now, because our own government, and to be honest, half of our citizens have no real concept of just how serious this is and just how far we've fallen. Our media is not reacting with the horror that the international media is reacting with. Our politicians are not acting with the horror that international politicians are acting with. It's like you guys can see it more clearly than half of the Australian population can see it. And that's why we need you guys to speak up.
And do you think that what is happening in Melbourne could happen in the Netherlands? or could happen in the other side of the
Honestly,
world?
honestly, if it can happen here, it can happen anywhere, with the only caveat being that we brought this on ourselves by being apathetic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So
We
what can
we
we
brought
learn from you? What do you want us to know? What do you want us to warn us for?
just because you ignore politics does not mean that politics will ignore you. Okay. Do not lull yourself into a false sense of security thinking that it can't happen to you, because if it can happen to us, it can happen to you. The only thing that has ever succeeded at limiting the power of government, limiting the power of tyrants, is the people's willingness to tolerate them. That's the only thing that has ever worked. We've designed, constitutional monarchies. We've designed Republican type governmental systems. We've designed the Westminster democratic system that we have here in Australia. These were all designed to limit the power of government, to put boxes around government and say, well, here's what you can do, and here's stuff that you can't touch. Anything outside of that, you can't touch. Every single one of those is failing right now. When you look at the US, they're not honoring their Bill of Rights. They're not staying within the limits of their own constitution. You look at monarchies around the world, same problem. You look at Westminster democracies around the world, same problem. Why? Because in the end, it's just words on a page. The only thing that stops a government from gathering whatever power it wants is when the people actively go, that ain't happening. So I've been encouraging civil disobedience here. The protests have become so violent that I'm worried someone's going to get killed. And therefore, I'm no longer necessarily encouraging the protests. They're still happening because, who am I? I'm just one voice, right? But the protests, I don't think, are the way forward anymore, given the amount of violence that is being used. But civil disobedience is a much easier thing to engage in. And you can do that where you are. You don't have to go to the city to do that. You can do that by going to the shops without a mask on. You can do that by hanging out with friends and taking your kid to see their kid and enjoy each other's company and live like normal human beings for a little while. Civil disobedience is almost impossible for the government to stop. And their power ends where our obedience ends. That's what ends their power. And we've got to reach the point where we have widespread civil disobedience. And I would be encouraging anyone else that wants to learn from Australia, get good at civil disobedience. Get good at not doing what you're told.
Thank you so much, Topher. Maybe just short, how does COVID affected your life? Because you are a filmmaker.
Yeah. Well, obviously there's been the economic impact. I've got a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old, and the impact on them has been pretty substantial. And that's been difficult as a dad, trying to guide them through that. I lost a friend to COVID. He was a 50-year-old man living in Bali, Indonesia, healthier than me. And it's just one of those lightning strikes, one of those situations where he was just one of those incredibly unlucky. Once you're below 50 years of age, and he was 50, but once you're below about 50 years of age and you're in good physical health, the odds, the danger from COVID for you is so incredibly low. But he was just one of those people. So I'm not someone who sits here and says, oh, it's not real, or there's nothing there, or it's a hoax, or any of that sort of stuff. No, it's very real. We can see that in the data from all over the world. And I've lost a friend to it. I've also had many friends who have had it and recovered just fine. I suspect that a lot more Australians have had it than what we realize. I think there have been some very deep flaws in our testing and in our approach to COVID. That means that we've missed an enormous number of cases. And I have a sneaking suspicion that I've already had it. And my wife and my kids as well. I think it went through the whole family at one point in time. So from my point of view, the virus itself, it's very real. It deserves a response, particularly if you interact with older people. You should take precautions. Let's not be unreasonable here. But in no way does this virus justify the extremity of the response that we've seen here in Australia. It does not justify shutting down your entire economic life. And what's becoming clearer and clearer now is that lockdowns and shutdowns cost lives. It's not as though you're spending money to save lives. No, you're spending money and lives to save lives. There is a life equation on both sides of that. And that was neglected. That wasn't considered. And that's becoming very obvious now that there is a human cost. There is a cost in lives to lockdowns. I'm very, very pleased that that's finally happening, because maybe we'll get to some semblance of normality sometime soon as people begin to take a more balanced approach and assess things a bit better. So how has it affected me? It's affected me and my family less than it's affected a lot of others.
Mm-hmm.
It's affected me more through the number of people that have needed my support and my help, because that has certainly gone through the roof. You know, and I'm lucky enough to be one of the ones in a position where I can help others. That's a very lucky place to be in right now. You know, I know of one of my friends who is paying another one of his friends' mortgage, because he has an office job that he can do from home on a laptop, and he's earning good money. And he just literally just picked up his mate's mortgage and just said, no, listen, don't walk away from the house. I'll pay your mortgage. We'll keep you in the house until this is over. I have a friend whose daughter is now on suicide watch.
Yeah.
You know, the damage is deep. The damage is largely invisible, and this is part of the problem. That when you can walk down the street and everything looks normal. You know, there's someone out doing the 2 hours of exercise, walking the dog, and there's someone else riding a bike, and there's a delivery truck driving past, and you can kid yourself into thinking that it's normal. But inside half of the houses that you walk past, there are people suffering. You know, you can't see them because they're locked inside, but they're suffering. And that's going to leave scars. It's certainly going to leave scars on me. It's had its effect on my kids. And it's going to take decades for that to heal. And for a lot of people, it will never fully heal. These will be lost years in terms of the progress that could have been made, but also years of loss in terms of, you know, there are people who had healthy businesses in 2019 and now they're bankrupt through no fault of their own.
Yeah.
They did nothing wrong, you know, and they've lost everything.
Do you think it stops? Does it stop when everybody says, no, I'm not participating anymore?
That would be nice. And look, yes, in theory, it does stop when everyone says no, but you need everyone to say no. Because when 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 or 100 people say no, the police have the resources to deal with that. You know, if 10 shops open up and start publicizing the fact that they're opening up, they get shut down straight away. If 1,000 shops opened up, well, now you'd be onto something, because the police don't have those resources, right? You know, when 5,000 people show up for a rally, we get mostly left alone by the police. But, you know, to actually really make a change, we need 100,000 people on the streets. And this is one of the things that I think concerns me most when you ask the question, how does it stop? You know, Victoria is a state of 6.5 million people. Melbourne is a city of 4.5 million people. And at our peak, by the most generous estimate, we only had 10,000 people at our biggest protest. And that's being generous.
Yeah, and people are afraid.
People are terrified. The fear campaign has worked.
Yeah.
But what does that mean for getting enough shopkeepers together to have a civil disobedience campaign? You're not going to get 1,000. You're not going to get enough.
Yeah.
So yes, it ends when everyone stops obeying, but what's going to get everyone to stop obeying? That's the question. And that's a question I don't have an answer for. Is
it a different situation in Melbourne than in Sydney?
Yeah, so in Sydney, it's a different state. So they have a different premier. And their premier, who just recently stood down, she's under a cloud for accusations of corruption, which probably aren't actually true, but may be. And she's decided to step down. She's been replaced by someone who I think is actually going to be an improvement. So I think actually it's not a bad thing necessarily. I don't think she necessarily deserved to be pushed out the way that she was, but I think her replacement's going to do an even better job. So not such a bad situation. But what they've done is taken a much more targeted approach. So they have imposed lockdowns and other measures that I think are wrong. I don't think that's the right way to do things. But instead of locking down the entire city or the entire state, they've locked down particular suburbs and particular municipal areas within the city. Their rules have been much more targeted, which means they've affected far fewer people and have been overall less bad.
Okay.
I would argue that they're still inappropriate. They're still trying to kill a mosquito with a flamethrower. You know, they're not using the right tool for the job. However, it's been less bad in Sydney than what it's been in Melbourne, without doubt.
Do you think Melbourne is a sort of test case for the world?
I don't know about a test case. There are people who talk about the fact that Daniel Andrews signed us up to the Safe Cities Network and had a deal with China with the Belt and Road Initiative. And then they extrapolate from that we're some kind of a communist test case or some kind of a Great Reset test case or what have you. Maybe. I can't say that we're not, right? Who knows? I can't say that we're not. But let me offer an alternative explanation. It is my view, my personal opinion, that Premier Daniel Andrews is a psychopath. And I don't mean that in the Hollywood, axe murdering sense. I mean, open the dictionary and read the definition of psychopath and compare each of the symptoms of psychopathy with Daniel Andrews and what he's done. And I think you'll find a perfect match. I don't think you'll find that any one of those symptoms is a mismatch to Daniel Andrews. So I think we have a genuine psychopath in charge of the state right now. And when you take someone who has psychopathic tendencies, who then wants to become a politician where their nature is to believe that politics and rules are the answer rather than the problem, and then you serve to them on a platter this amazing opportunity. Here's this pandemic. Everyone's afraid. The media is whipping it all up into a frenzy. And he sits there and goes, I was born for this moment. This is my time to shine. I'm Superman. I'm going to rip off the suit and Superman is going to be underneath. I'm going to come in and save everybody. It isn't necessarily that there's some agenda playing out or what have you. It's a perfect storm of a psychopath with power and a population who were fearful. And when you put those two together, I think that goes a long way to explaining where we are.
Okay. Thank you so much for talking to me and explaining to the Netherlands what's going on in Melbourne. Thank you so much, Topher. Wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Big hug for you. And
yeah, thank you.
hope to talk to you soon in another better circumstances. Yeah.
Well, look, Erica, much appreciated. And can I just say, from everyone, not everyone, because some people are stupid and think that all of this is okay, but from everyone that recognizes that what's happening down here is not okay, we are very grateful for the international attention, for the fact that you guys are actually asking questions and wanting to know more. We appreciate that. It helps us to stay sane because it reminds us that we haven't gone crazy. And it gives us some hope that maybe international pressure might make some level of difference. So thank you to you. Thank you to all of your viewers. Can I just ask everyone that watches this, please share it. Please help it to get out there. Here in Australia, we are, and particularly in Melbourne, we are desperate for some kind of a solution. And the more of the world that knows what's happening, the better the chance of that day coming.
Yeah. Well, we reach out to you. En think about you and all the people in Australia. Ja,
thank you.
Thank you so much. Ja, er gebeurt veel daar. Ik hoop dat je heel veel hebt mee kunnen krijgen van het verhaal van Topher. En dat het je heeft geïnspireerd om nog meer te realiseren wat daar aan de hand is. Dat deze video daar aan bijgedragen heeft. Bedankt voor het kijken. Vond je het een toffe video en waardeer je dat wat ik aan het doen ben? Zou ik het fijn vinden dat je je abonneert op mijn kanaal. Zodat ik nog meer interviews en verhalen van mensen over de hele wereld die ook hun kant van het verhaal willen vertellen. Bedankt voor het kijken.